Hey, how's it going? On this episode of Home Water Dispatch, I'm on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and it's the time of year when the Cheeky Schoolie tournament happens, and the Schoolie tournament focuses on striped bass. And Schoolies are technically like the smaller striped bass in the population. It's the largest fly fishing tournament in the world. There's hundreds of anglers all over the Cape right now fishing from shore. It's part of the criteria tied to the tournament. And it's also a tournament that focuses a lot on conservation and rallying around the future of striped bass stocks. The trends don't look very good. Striped bass stocks are kind of in trouble. When we look at some of the data, there's a heck of a lot more pressure being put on striped bass stocks by recreational anglers than there are from commercial fishers. And we have some data to support that. And so when it comes to the future of striped bass, some might say, oh, well, there's too much fishing going on. We should roll back on the number of anglers. And at the same time, those anglers are also a really powerful voice to lobby for the future of the striped bass stocks. And so how do we reconcile this? We basically use some science to make sure that when anglers are fishing for striped bass and practicing catch and release, those fish that are being released, because of regulations, slot limits are imposed, so you can only harvest fish within a certain slot, and there's harvest limits. That means a lot of striped bass are being let go. And if we want there to be a future, oh, I heard a fish. If we want there to be a future for striped bass, we need more anglers to use best practices for catch and release. And believe it or not, up until 5 or 10 years ago, there hasn't been a lot of science on striped bass catch and release, and that's been growing. And I feel fortunate. A couple years ago, I got a grant from Woods Hole Sea Grant, and it was focusing on striped bass catch and release, and across a lot of different gear types. So the one thing with the striped bass fishery is like super complex and super diverse, and meaning that people are fishing here during the tournament from shore, but there's people out there on boats, and there's people on jetties, and there's people using bait, and there's people using conventional rods, and all sorts of things. And it's a super complex fishery. And this begs the question of how much science is too much? Well, we need more, right? And we need to bring in more science to look at the responses of striped bass to these different gear types. And that's where the science in sort of my lab with my collaborators came in to be, to kind of start to pick apart these sort of gear-specific and situation-dependent best practices that are needed for striped bass. And, ahead of that, some of you may know that I'm the science advisor for Keep Fish Wet, and Keep Fish Wet has this really cool program called Stripers in Our Hands, where they take the science and they turn it into best practices that anglers can use. Fairly generalized though, when it comes to different gear types. And so the results of the science that's coming out of my lab and some other research, it's going to start honing these best practices. And these are open source, they're free to share because it's through sort of that grassroots sharing of these best practices. That's how we're going to improve the outcome of striped bass that are caught and released, right? And to help get them contribute to the future of the population. I'm usually cautious about relaying results of studies before they're physically published in scientific journals. And I do that because the scientific process is important, including publications in peer-reviewed journals, because that provides independent critique of the science, of the analyses. It's an important filter that happens so that once it's published, we can feel really confident in those results and how those results can be used to inform best practices for catch and release, how they can be used to inform policy and management. And so So I'm careful. We have to be, right? And that's sort of the power of this evidence-based and science-based approach. And we hope that lots of fish conservation and management is based on science. We would hope. In the meantime, I can tell you, because we're at the Cheeky tournament and it's a fly fishing based tournament, focusing on this gear type, what we observed, and one nugget of our data showed that striped bass caught via fly fishing were influenced by the duration of the fight time. The longer the fight time, the more that the striped bass were impaired at release. We didn't observe any mortality, which was kind of cool. At the same time, if a striped bass is impaired at release or more impaired because you fought them for a long period of time, and if there's predators around, seals, sharks, the probability of mortality is going to go up, right? And so a very, very simple thing that fly anglers can do when it comes to striped bass catch and release is fight the fish a little bit harder. Yes, you might break some fish off, but is that an okay compromise? Does that have to be a compromise because of the future of striped bass? Are we willing to increase our leader size, go from 20 pound to 25 or 30? Are we willing to learn how to fight use your fly rod to actually fight the fish a little bit harder? We might have to use those subtle variation in our techniques for fly fishing and changing our gear preferences a little bit in order to make sure more striped bass that are caught via fly fishing swim away in the best condition possible. There is more coming up related to conventional fishing. I'll do another episode on Home Water Dispatch when it comes to some modifications in gear type for conventional anglers. Some things we might have anticipated and some things we may not have. So keep that in mind. So if you're fly fishing for striped bass, in addition to the typical things like reducing air exposure, reducing handling time, a big thing that stood out was fight time. And once that science gets published, we're going to work with Keep Fish Wet and almost make like a little decision tree for anglers tied to stripers in our hands, where it's just like, are you fly fishing? Yes. Here's some best practices that you should consider. Are you using conventional gear? Yes. With artificial baits, here's some things you can consider. So that's happening. And I look forward to sharing more about striped bass catch and release on another episode of Home Water Dispatch. Right now I'm going to go and hang out with some anglers, talk about striped bass catch and release, and enjoy some time here on the Cape. All right, so thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.